These former admissions officers have been asked to evaluate this IvyWise students' college application essays. Catch up on part 1 so you don't miss their profile evaluation.
I guess we're ready to jump to the personal statement here. And maybe this is a good opportunity to talk a little bit about the roundtable process and how that works. This essay was brought in one form to me as the counselor, and I provided some feedback and some edits, and the student continued to work on this a little bit and got it into a form that we felt was ready for roundtable. It's important that we have something that's a solid working document before we bring it to roundtable. And in roundtable, your essays will be seen by a number of different counselors from across the IvyWise team who bring, again, a variety of perspectives and expertise and backgrounds to that, to the evaluation of that essay. And then we take those comments as individual counselors and we review them with our students, and we talk about which ones we want to implement, which ones make sense, which ones feel right, produce another draft of that essay and with those changes. And generally it goes back to roundtable for what we hope will be a final pass. You do get a few other comments because you now have a different set of counselors looking at it. But again, more expertise, more background. Generally speaking, after 2 passes through roundtable, if we've done our job up front, then we have a pretty successful essay here. So we have 2 versions of this essay, including the final one for you to take a look at. And this was a response to prompt number 1. Students, you may have a background or identity that's so important your application is incomplete without it. What were your thoughts about this, Tiffany?
I think, Chris, that prompt selection for prompt number 1 would be an excellent decision there, because it's very grounding. That would help the reader immediately understand the experience that she's about to refer to, an experience or a connection that is centralizing and grounding for her. And in this essay, she's really discussing those times on the campground in the Poconos. Right. And I think that is a wonderful founding conversation. So the Common App allows you to pick from a number of different prompts, and the 7th prompt being what I call the topic of your choice. It could be one that you've already written, one that you responded to that responds to a different prompt, or you can design your prompt all of your own. And so when students pick this prompt, I say that it's almost like Jeopardy. There has to be a question within a question, right? Meaning that if you respond to the other prompts, I know the question that was posed, and I know the answer that I have an expectation of the answer that you're about to provide for me. So when a student picks this topic, they both must provide the question that they're addressing, kind of what I'm going to learn from you in this essay, and they also have to provide the answer. Right. And so this initial draft had some wonderful pieces about it, but also needed to make some changes. I think initially I was lost on, okay, what is the question? Right. What will I learn in this essay? And then more specifically, did you answer that question? So one thing that it does really well is that first sentence, I'm hooked. Squirrels are throwing something at us, right? So, and I'm thinking, immediately my mind is racing to, where are we? What's happening? Why are these squirrels relevant? And where's the context? So in truth, this intro has such a wonderful abstract nature about it, but in truth, I started to skim, right, the first paragraph, even into the second paragraph, because I wanted to know, where are we going with this? It's almost too abstract. I wanted to know, what is this essay about? So I started to skim. I started to rush through the nuances packed into the first paragraph and the second paragraph, because I wanted to understand, what is the topic of this essay? And so while it does a beautiful job really setting the scene, I think it needed to provide a little bit more context to, or a little, I would say, kind of trails along the way in the first sentence, or the first paragraph or the second paragraph, to help the reader understand where will we ultimately explore in this essay? A little too abstract for me in the very first 2 paragraphs. It took a little bit for me to understand what was I going to learn from the student.
That's some great advice about that final prompt, which I do think really needs to be very clear when students begin to address it.
I think that what this essay does, especially for an initial draft, a roundtable not only includes things that does not work well, but it actually really enforces and encourages students on what they are doing well. I enjoyed that there was a transition or a discussion that connected her being outside in camping to her interest in biology, right? And her research in biology. I do think, even coming from the MIT lady, I do think that it got a little technical, right? In the discussion of her research in the labs and things of that nature. And so I like the connection there, but I would encourage her to change the discussion of the research in her next draft. Last but not least, I do like that there was a nod to volleyball in this conversation, in that first in this essay. And it's always a fine line with our student athletes, right? At this point of time, an admissions officer understands that you are a volleyball player, or that you have a significant contribution to that sport that you're pursuing. And so how the sport appears in your application should be handled delicately. And so I do appreciate that this student did not write an entire Common App essay on the sport itself, right?
The big game essay, right?
Exactly, right?
The big game essay, that's always a trap. And I also, am wary of essays that are simply recitations of the activities list. And I think she did a great job here of making meaningful connections between some of her activities to this founding part of who she is, her family, her character, and so I thought that was well done. That really making meaningful connection, not just sort of saying, and so this is how I use it in volleyball, and this is how I use it in the lab, and this is how I use it in the right. It was, I think, a much more nuanced essay than that. Shall we talk a little bit about the changes that occurred over time?
Absolutely.
One of the first things that we did when we looked at this initial draft to make some changes was to front load all of the family stuff. I think one of the things that stood out to me as I was reading it the first time through was there's kind of a jump to the science without sort of fully telling the story of the family experience. And so in the final version, all of that really nice sort of evocative writing about the experience is front-loaded a little bit, and then she moves to the science thing. So that was one thing that I thought was an improvement that came out of, honestly, at this point, I'm not sure whether it was me, her, or a roundtable, but made it better.
Absolutely. And the same kind of nuance and fluid discussion about something flows into her discussion about her research in biology, right? This approach feels warmer, less technical and less clinical, a rehash of what I've actually done in my research, and more reflected on the application of it, what it means for her to be outside in a natural environment, and I won't call it a layman's discussion of the research, but more in the sense of an application of it, right? An application of the research. How these things kind of thread together more naturally is something accomplished in this essay. Whereas when I'm considering her actual research, there'll be plenty of times in her application for me to understand the technical things that she accomplished, right? So for example, that letter from the science research teacher, she may have included an additional letter of recommendation from a research mentor, right? There are other opportunities for me to understand the specifics of her research I'm pretty excited that the final one did not necessarily include the play-by-play. I think many students get very anxious to tell me the technical terms. And although I have worked for MIT, I'm not a scientist, right? I have a background in foreign affairs, right? Politics. So even in that sense, it really is tailored to the reader, so the reader understands how she connects with the science on the emotional, on the intellectual level. And that's a story that only she can tell. Someone else can tell the story of what she actually accomplished in the lab, right? But only she can tell and reflect on how it made her feel and the importance of it.
Yeah, and I will tell you that she definitely dumbed it down for me. There was no doubt about that. And I think that was helpful in getting to the place that that you're recognizing is, help me understand it, but don't expect me to do it. I'm not going in the lab. I'm not doing what you're doing. I think another thing that I really liked about the essay, and I think this is a really important thing for students to remember to do, is to bring it back at the end, right? To wrap it up again. So we went from this evocative description, squirrels throwing acorns, and you're right, great hook, right? Like a great lead, really makes you wonder what's going on. And then we have this really lovely description of what family means and who's there. The addition of the empty chairs for the grandparents who started the tradition just really speaks to how important family is. Then we go through sort of the connection to some of the most important activities, and then we're brought back at the end to who this person is, right? And that's one of the most important things you're trying to do in an essay, is help them see who you are. It's one of the few opportunities you have. I think of the essay as coloring outside of the lines sometimes, right? This is one of the great opportunities you have in the Common Application, which, let's admit it, is a bit of a blunt instrument, right, in the final analysis, in terms of encapsulating the first 17 years of your life. And so the essay really does need to help show us who you are and what matters to you. And I think that by bringing it back at the end, she really effectively does that.
Absolutely. It's not only about, there are many things that an admissions office can draw out of this, right? And one of the keywords that she pulls towards the end of this essay is really talking about community, right? And so from this essay, there are notes about her character, notes about what she values that's really translatable for me as an admissions officer to understand how she might apply these things in her community outside of this, right? For example, the empty chairs for the grandparents, there's this feeling of tradition. There's a sense of honoring something. Through the research, there's a sense of curiosity that she ties into. And all of those things she can replicate maybe in different ways, but replicate on my campus as an admissions officer. So this conclusion to the essay is actually pretty powerful, right? It sums it up very nicely, brings it back to the end, but it also allows me to fill in the gaps and picture her on my campus through these experiences. And my campus is not the Poconos, but I can understand her wanting to be a part of my community in the same way.
And someone we see as someone who will contribute in multiple ways. Right. To our community, right? I mean, I read this essay, and yes, there are lots of great things about it, but one of my takeaways is, wow, love for this to be my kid's roommate, right? Absolutely. That's one of the great hallmate, right? This is the kid you want in the hall. And so these are other things that we draw from this as admission officers when we think about the communities that we're trying to build and shape and maintain and perpetuate on our campuses. These are the sorts of things that really stand out, and it's good stuff. As we've said, this student was a recruited athlete. While all of this was going on, there was also a parallel process with coaches, was visiting campuses, meeting with coaches, and finding out, was there a good connection there? Was this someone I felt like I could play for? Is this someone I'm excited to be in their program for 4 years? What are the other athletes like on this campus that I'm meeting through this process? What's the culture and the sense of camaraderie on this particular team? And that's a really important part of this athletic recruiting process, is to know as much as you can about the coach and your potential teammates and how the program is run and all of those different things. And part of that is, as we've alluded to before, this early read process, where once you have your final year junior grades and you have a school profile, which is usually available online from your school, also in the guidance office. And that's useful because, as Tiffany said before in talking about the transcript, that lets us know what's available. So we can contextualize that transcript. So we want to have that school profile, and then we'll also take whatever test scores you have to that date. And coaches gather that information, they share it with their liaison, and the liaison basically says, red light, green light, yellow light, in terms of the recruiting process. This is not a student we're really going to be able to admit for you. This is a student, if they're really important to you, you can proceed, and we'll see what happens. But, there's this is a green light, right? This transcript lands on your desk from a coach's office, and this is a green light here, moving forward. And through that process, very frequently, student athletes, again, have a very clear idea of where they're headed in late summer before their senior year begins. In this student's scenario, the school she ultimately wanted to go to and was successfully admitted to didn't have any supplementary essays. So this was the one that we had to work on. And while we were working on other applications, because we didn't know how things were going to pan out, and working on supplemental essays there, in the end, when everything came to fruition with this particular college, we're able to put away all the supplementary essays. This is not a reason to look at schools that don't have supplements. They can be a little onerous, but again, especially with an IvyWise counselor for support, these are going to be opportunities to put your best foot forward and really show a school what you have to offer in multiple ways. So don't think of supplemental essays as necessarily as a horrible thing. They can be great ways to really share more about you. Just as an example, I had another student I worked with this year who applied early decision to a school that had no supplementary essays, and my reaction was, oh, that's really too bad here, because it was a reach for that student. And had they been able to get all of this other information that we were working on in supplemental essays for other schools, I think that might have had a better outcome. Ultimately admitted early decision to another great school. So happy outcomes in the end. But that was an opportunity where opportunity lost because there were no supplementary essays. So bear that in mind as you look at what schools are asking you to do. Tiffany, what would be your sort of final takeaways here? What was most compelling to you?
I think that my first reaction is I appreciate how truly balanced the application is outside of the athletic recruitment. In absolute honesty, right? This kind of application would make it easy to accept as an athletic liaison. And so I am always slightly concerned when an athlete is truly relying on that coach support to be truly admissible in the admissions process. Because as an admissions officer, I'm not only thinking of getting them in, but I'm thinking about getting them through. Right? So for a student that is really outside of an academic profile or shows no interest in, our academics maybe, or no interest in, at MIT, not interested in the STEM, subjects at all. I'm thinking about campus and environment match, right? There has to be a better term for it that I'm not thinking about right now, but that idea of, should you come to my campus and no longer choose to engage in this athletic activity, will you be happy here? Right? Will you not only survive, but will you thrive? Would you still have made this choice? That's something that's always very important to an admissions officer, because we're thinking of the application pool and the class as a whole. So while you might be drawn to this specific school because of this athletic relationship that you have, right? As an admissions officer, I have to both think of this athletic relationship, but I also have to think about your relationship to the university as a whole, right? And remember, you're going through the admissions because admissions has that final say, that final word. They offer that official letter, and that's always important to remember. So what stands out the most to me is, yes, this student was a recruited athlete. However, this student was truly admissible and competitive across the board to a number of universities, just by having a strong academic profile, developed interest outside of the the athletic recruitment is only the cherry on the top, right? It's only the plus. It's only the addition to a very solid and strong application. And so that's really what stands out to me, right? So even if you are dedicated to your athletics in the highest level, make sure that you're also showing that same commitment to student athlete, right? That both need to be there for an admissions officer to feel excited about this decision and really supportive. I think it will ease your application process. And as an IvyWise counselor, that I know that that's something that we really support our families in, finding that balance between the student and the athlete all the time. So that's something that in general really, really worked well for this applicant, and that it's almost easy to forget, right, that they were a coach-supported athlete at all in this process because of how strong overall the application was.
Yeah, and just kind of coming at it from the other perspective for a sec, because you make some great points about what admission officers are thinking about in the big picture as they consider these student athletes. Is it's important for the student to think about that as well, right? And sometimes we call that the broken leg test, right? If I break my leg and I can't play my sport anymore, is this the school I want to be at, right? Is this still where I want to go? And that's the ultimate litmus test, and one that we really help our students help our students find, is that place where, yes, they can go and have a great athletic career, but if that for some reason doesn't pan out, that they're still at a school they're really excited about, with a culture they value, and academics that challenge them, and programs that get them where they want to go.
Absolutely. And that's part of the discussion that we have as kind of former admissions officers around Roundtable. Not only are we commenting on that specific essay and the things of that nature, we're talking about a student's match or fit with that university as a whole, and taking that feedback to our students to make sure that they understand how it's coming across, that match, that interest in the school. And maybe sometimes encouraging them to do a little bit more research to make sure that that fit or that match comes across. But it's definitely happens on both sides, because you might choose a school because you love the coach and the coach might leave. So making sure that a very likely a high probability for many student athletes. So finding that match is something that we want to support our students through, and it's something that is definitely there and part of the conversation for our roundtable. Chris, anything to you that stood out particularly? I know you're pretty close to the to the student.
No, I mean, I think that you've summed it up in really, really well. And yes, this was a great student to work with. Anybody who is this committed and this successful is probably putting the right amount of energy into the college application process. And that's something to bear in mind, is that if you're doing this right, applying to college is kind of like a part-time job, right? It's 10 to 20 hours a week at the peak season, and you really have to dedicate time and attention to it. It ain't like it used to be, right? I remember writing essays by hand and by the light of kerosene lamp as well. But no, that part isn't true. But and I think the other thing that sort of gets lost in the quality of this application is the caliber of athlete, and where this student might have been able to go and compete athletically. Athletic recruitment does play a role in that process, right? And sometimes the schools that you're looking at, you might be interested in the school, but find out that the coach doesn't have interest in you, and that can be hard news. But if athletics is that important, there are lots of great places out there. And so just keep going, keep persevering. You will find a great home where you can compete and you can grow and thrive, just like we all want our students to do, our own kids to do, our children, and the students that we work with. Thanks so much, Tiffany, for your time today and reviewing this with me. This was an application I really enjoyed working on. I think that it's a great example of, what you can put together if you make a concerted effort over the course of your high school career to figure out who you are and what you're interested in and kind of how you want to be in the world, right? And so, I appreciate your time in reviewing this and talking about the process that we went through. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Same to you, Chris. I think it's great to share with an outside audience what we do in Roundtable fairly often all throughout our season at IvyWise. So it's been nice to review this, and you're always helpful in roundtable conversations. We have over 30 other counselors that join us in roundtable reviews, and so it's nice to be able to talk you through this applicant, but many, many more to come in our futures. Thanks again.
Thanks, everybody, for watching today. We hope that you got some valuable information and got some insight into the counselors at IvyWise can really help you put together the strongest possible application. We have over 440 years of combined experience amongst our counselors, and these counselors have worked at some of the world's top universities, been high school guidance counselors in some of the best schools in the country, and the range of expertise is unbelievable. So please check out our website. You can learn more about all the things that we can do for you in admission counseling, tutoring, test prep, research opportunities. We have a plethora of resources about athletic recruiting on our website as well. So please visit that if any of this was of interest to you and helpful. And we look forward to connecting with you in the future.
Contact IvyWise today to learn more about our services, including our signature roundtable, which simulates the real-world admissions committee evaluation process.